Good morrow, everyone, and welcome to Shakespeare and Friends, the series in which we engage with some of the big questions surrounding Shakespeare and early modern history. I'm Darren Freebury-Jones, and my co-host is Rachel Aanstad. And today we're exploring the question, did Shakespeare's audiences believe in fairies? Now, Rachel, as part of my Shakespeare and Panto book, it sounds a little bit like a euphemism, but I have dipped a tentative toe into fairyland. And I have to say, my understanding, just fascinating, Fairylore. So I'm very excited to do this episode. And I wondered if you could get the proverbial ball or the Adjet stone rolling and tell us a little bit about fairy history.
You bet. And this is one of my very favorite topics in the whole world. And it was really kind of my entry point into Shakespeare because I saw a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, in a park in Chicago when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And when I saw Titania, come down the stairs, that was it. I was hooked. I never wanted to be in any other world again. And so I feel like kind of part of me is always kind of in that world. So I'm super happy to get to talk about it today. So, fairies, really interesting. Uh, the word fairy comes from essentially the word fate or the Fatas, who were goddesses in ancient Greece and Rome. And I'm condensing this extremely, so please forgive me, all my classicists. But basically, these were goddesses of fate. And they measured a person's life by measuring the thread. Uh, One would spin the thread, one would measure the thread, and one would cut the thread. And that would determine uh, both the length of a person's life and kind of the character of it. Was it finely spun? Was it lumpy? Was it did it get tangled as soon as they threw it on the ground? There was a lot of metaphors for this. And so these characters, these three women, they really seem to permeate the consciousness of, certainly anybody influenced by Greco-Roman culture, which is a pretty large group of people in general. But as this kind of trickled through, the history and the consciousness and the stories, eventually they became the Fae, and Fae meant fate. And just as an ancient Roman would be very nervous about mentioning the fates by name, this was also true even in Shakespeare's day. They might be called the kindly ones. People were kind of nervous about mentioning their name directly. And so there were all these kinds of uh, euphemisms for these beings who were really terrifying because they determined the length of your life. Now, as these archetypes kind of trickled through, and as Christianity and other monotheistic religions began to grow, the powers of these women became kind of increasingly modified, and they became less of arbiters of necessarily your personal fate, how long you were going to live, and everything else, and more of a somebody who could interfere with your destiny, and somebody who could, by bringing you into their world, change your perception of time so that when you went to be in their world, uh, who knows how many years had passed back on Earth. So they still kind of retain this ability to manipulate time. And of course, like any other supernatural being, they could be dangerous. They could seduce you, they could control your mind, they could kill you, they could turn you into, some inconvenient creature. They really had. Um,
They'd have a hard job with that one. I feel I'm already there.
you don't think they could make you any more inconvenient of a creature? I think it would be inconvenient for you if you were trying to give your lectures as a frog, for instance. That might make your life a little tougher. Just see you driving around Wales and not able to reach the pedals could be a problem for you. All right, so so we've got our fairies, we've got our fates. Um, in addition to the fates, the the Greek nymphs, that they looked
Yes.
over natural things, springs, trees, flowers. Those got kind of merged in with the fates to create basically these supernatural beings who looked after the natural world. And eventually this developed into a whole hierarchy. They had queens and kings and, very complicated court structure and everything else. So, uh, hard to say. Were they copying us? You know, did were there ever Republican Democratic fairies at any point in the past? I don't know, but by the time we get to the 16th century, everything is very human society coded in a way, very much of a mirror. Now, in addition to what we think of as these sort of glamorous fairies, um, there were also like goblins, uh, pukas, other kinds of more um, earthy beings that, to my mind, come more from, again, that sort of dryad tradition, the sort of earth uh, creature tradition, people kind of made from rocks and dirt and what have you. And these creatures were thought to be very mischievous. And this is where you get the stories of like elves and gnomes and goblins who do your housework for you, uh, provided you treat them correctly. I guess you're not supposed to thank them. Um, you are always supposed to put out a bucket of water before you went to sleep each night, ostensibly for the mommy fairies to wash the baby fairies. But I think it makes a really effective uh, fire prevention
Mm.
um, step. Is kind of my feeling about it, that that just kind of having this tradition of impressing upon people, no matter how tired you are, no matter how drunk you got to put that bucket of water by the fire before you go to bed at night, or the fairies may be angry with you. Um, in any event, we get this sort of folklorish soup by the time we get to the 16th century. And it's such a mixture of ancient Greek, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, Celtic ideas of what moves things in nature, French ideas, Scandinavian, all of it. It's like this kind of conglomeration, and it all seems to really crystallize in this period. I don't know. Is it because through the printing press, lots of ideas are being sort of made more regimented and kind of concrete. Um, but there's this sort of wonderful amorphous quality to it when Shakespeare is lucky enough to
Mm.
get a hold of this incredibly rich vein of material. Now, Puck is a really interesting character because before Shakespeare gets a hold of him, Puck is a kind of a Republican Democrat in that he he believes that the working class is what's important and they should be in control. And he was kind of a bugbear, kind of a threat to the
Mm,
upper classes that if they got, too abusive, that Puck would come and beat the crap out of him. He was supposed to be like this big, hairy guy, and he would
mm,
carry a broom to beat people with when he thought that they were being jerks. And in a sense, it's kind of, I think, sad what Shakespeare turns Puck into, because through Shakespeare, Puck becomes a servant, to this guy that in the past he would have been like, get off my back. Like,
mm,
and instead
mm.
he's like, oh, I'll put a girdle around the earth, Oberon, 40 minutes, no problem. Whatever you say, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So uh, Shakespeare really does quite a transformational uh, process on the fairies. And with the exception of Edmund Spenser, we don't really see a lot of other people doing what Shakespeare
Yeah.
does with it. And I'm not going to go too far into that direction, but basically, Shakespeare shrinks down the fairies. They were never tiny before that. He does some interesting things with Titania because Edmund Spenser, when he wrote The Fairy Queen, he was writing this very kind of political fawning tract for Elizabeth I, talking about this queen of the fairies. She's so chaste and she's so pure, and she never let a man touch her, and she would, you know, heaven forfend, I'm sure she never ever got naked anywhere for any reason. And then Shakespeare turns this character into Titania,
Mm,
who enjoys sex, clearly, and you know ends up having sex with an ass. So this feels to me incredibly subversive, and is in many ways, for me, I think, one of Shakespeare's more daring plays, that he would imply that the queen was this kind of amoral, sexually loose um being who can have sex with a donkey and not even remember it. Wake up the next day and go, "Oh, I got a headache," I think something happened with this guy. Maybe, I don't know. It just goes on with her life. It's no problem. So that fascinates me. But in Elizabeth I, got into the fairy aesthetic, the queen of the fairy aesthetic, in a big way because she was fairly desperate for female authority figures that she could use as iconography. In the past, queens just used Mary as, the bride of God and so on. They could emulate Mary as a feminine figure of authority, but because of the situation with Catholicism and Elizabeth's sister Mary, who'd caused some problems, she couldn't you know avail herself of that traditional iconography. And so, she's reaching for Artemis and Diana and Titania and, Queen of the Fairies, all of these things to say, look, I'm not the first woman in the history of the world to rule. Uh, and this is even happening, in this other world that we can't quite see. We all agree that there's a queen of fairy and that she seems to be in charge. And so Elizabeth herself adds to this soup that Shakespeare is working with. She was doing that long before he wrote Midsummer Night's Dream. And so, you know, it's tempting from our perspective to think, oh, she was influenced by that Elizabeth I was influenced by A Midsummer Night's Dream. I don't think so. By then things were pretty solidly set in terms of that aesthetic. Uh, I mean, we don't even know if she saw it. Do we? Do we know if she saw Midsummer Night's Dream?
No, we don't. So the only plays we could be fairly confident Elizabeth saw would be Love's Labour's Lost and The Merry Wives of Windsor. So she might very well have seen it, but we can't be
But we
sure.
can't quite be sure. Yeah. Okay.
No.
All right. Well, so I'm going to hand this soup off to you and
I shall drink the soup. Yes. Well, I was interested you were talking about other writers outside of Shakespeare, so
Mhm,
Edmund Spenser, and it got me thinking about other playwrights who deal in fairies. And you were talking quite a bit about Titania or Titania, as I tend to pronounce
mhm,
it. And we think Shakespeare got the name for her from Ovid's Metamorphoses. So
mhm.
that's quite a major contribution, that name. But another popular figure you see in plays of the period is Oberon. And Oberon, I believe, derives from a medieval romance,
Mhm,
Huon de Bordeaux.
mhm.
And according to medieval accounts, I believe he's meant to be the child of Julius Caesar and a fairy.
And Morgan Le Fay, yes, the sister or daughter of Merlin, depending on who you ask. Um,
It's quite
w-
important to make that distinction, really, isn't it?
things can get messy. Um, just look at the Ptolemies, right? It's not that unusual a situation, I guess. But
But he was a
yeah,
popular. Oh, sorry, go on.
Oberon, fascinating figure. Um, very short, like,
Yes.
considered to be like just 3 feet tall,
Yeah.
and had a magic horn that you could get as much food as you wanted and summon help. Oberon was very popular in like among necromancers as a
Mm,
spirit to try to contact. But what we don't know is whether that happened because of Shakespeare
mm.
or if it was happening at the same time as Shakespeare.
Interesting. Well,
It's
he's a
it all
popular.
kind of at once. Yeah.
Yes. Well, he's a popular dramatic figure, and that's
Mm,
before Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. So one dramatic version of Oberon that stands out to me occurs in my good friend Robert Greene, who famously called Shakespeare an upstart crow. And it's in the history of James IV, which I think is a fascinating play about a fairly unhistorical James IV figure who desires to execute or assassinate his wife because he's fallen for another woman. And that whole play is a play within a play. So you have Oberon at a tomb with a misanthrope named Bohan. And Bohan represents the genre of tragedy, some scholars
mm.
say, and Oberon represents the genre of comedy. So this is quite a cheerful Oberon figure we see in that play. And there have been scholars like Thomas H. Dickinson, who edited a collection of Robert Greene's plays, who believe that that play within a play in the history of James IV is
Oh,
more effective than the Christopher Sly induction in The Taming of the Shrew. So that's one quite interesting account of Oberon there. But you also see a darker version of the character who makes a bizarre cameo in a dark tragedy called Lust Dominion, which I attribute to Thomas Dekker, John Day, and William Houghton. And I think John Day probably supplies this moment when Oberon turns up and foretells the heroine's death. And Ben Jonson also liked to write about fairies. most hilariously and effectively, I would suggest, in The Alchemist, where you have a character named Dapper who is duped into believing he is the nephew and heir to the Queen of the Fairies. And the Queen of the Fairies happens to be a sex worker in disguise. But Ben Jonson also produced a masque called Oberon, the Fairy Prince, in 1611. So he was clearly a very popular figure before and after Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, I think.
That's that's fascinating. And I think what's really interesting is how different the Oberons are.
Yes.
He hasn't settled into a stereotype
No. Which is
at
quite an
all.
achievement, isn't it, really?
I
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, when you consider what poor Antonio has to go through, yes,
Yes, yes,
you
yes.
know.
It tallies with my reading of fairies in general, really. I was really surprised at the antithetical extremes of fairies. So these are beings that can help you sweep the dust beneath your door, or they can pinch you, they can harass you, they can also exchange your child for a changeling. And I found it particularly fascinating when I was doing a bit of research on fairies for the Shakespeare and Panto book, just looking at the links they have to other supernatural beings. So we see it in A Midsummer Night's Dream when they essentially say that they need to affect their deeds ere day, so before the morning breaks. And Oberon does say to Puck that we are spirits of another sort, that with the morning's love, have done some sport. But you do get the sense that they are primarily confined tonight. And it reminds me of Marcellus's speech about the ghost fading on the crowing of the cock in Hamlet. And the actions of fairies were often associated with witches as well. And my understanding is that fairies were sometimes associated with spirits of the dead. So they're these fascinating figures that have all of these different folkloric links to other beings. They almost seem to occupy this liminal space between witches and ghosts. And I always remember I was teaching a visiting residential group. I think they were from the United States, and they were watching a production of The Merry Wives of Windsor in Stratford upon Avon at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And this was a very modern take on the play. It was set very much in the 21st century. And when we were discussing that production the next morning, a student said that they didn't feel one moment of the play quite worked for them because it didn't feel very modern. And it was the moments when Falstaff is utterly terrified by fairies. So this student said, nobody's scared of fairies anymore. But it is a fascinating moment where you have Falstaff at his third and final public humiliation for having the audacity to try and woo the titular and somewhat titillating wives of the title. He turns up in Windsor Forest, dressed as Herne the Hunter, and then you have the community disguised as fairies. You actually have the character of Anne Page taking the role of the fairy queen. And Falstaff says, "They are fairies. He that speaks to them shall die." So he is utterly terrified by these fairies. And I also found it very interesting thinking of Macbeth, thinking of the Weird Sisters, the witches, because I'm frankly fascinated by this first-hand
Mhm.
eyewitness account of Macbeth in 1611 during Shakespeare's lifetime from the astrologer Simon Forman. And he describes seeing Macbeth, a performance at the Globe Playhouse. He describes the Weird Sisters as fairies or nymphs. And you were talking about nymphs earlier. Uh, which is quite different to the
Mhm.
midnight hags with skinny lips and choppy fingers that we know in the surviving 1623 First Folio text. So a theory is that Macbeth was adapted most likely by the dramatist Thomas Middleton in 1616, the year of Shakespeare's death. So the fairies, as Shakespeare the fairies, the witches, as Shakespeare quite possibly wrote them, likely closer to his chronicle historical source material.
Mhm.
And it also reminds me of an account of James I being greeted by three sibyls at the gates of Oxford, who proclaimed him as a descendant of Banquo.
Mhm.
Now, these fairy figures, you imagine a modern production of Macbeth, if they were presented as
Mhm.
fairies, I imagine a lot of audiences would probably find them slightly less terrifying as they might have during Shakespeare's time. But I think audiences probably would have been quite scared if they were presented as fairies or nymphs. And it's interesting that Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream speaks of Hecate, almost as if the fairies are under the patronage of Hecate. And the theory is that Thomas Middleton added the Hecate or Hecate or Hecate scenes to Macbeth because Hecate is a remarkable figure. So a Greek goddess of
Mhm.
the moon, necromancy, magic, but often associated with fairies as well. And Thomas Middleton writes of fairies in The Witch, which actually stages Hecate. So truly remarkable fairies, I think. I never knew they were so complicated,
Oh my
Rachel,
goodness,
before I
yes.
started delving into them.
Oh my goodness, yes. And one really interesting thing is that, uh, in the 16th century, they really didn't see much of a difference between witches and fairies. And in
Yes.
fact, it was thought that human witches were taught by fairies. They thought that human women would get kidnapped by fairies in order to breastfeed the fairies' children. And in return, they would be paid for this with magical powers and taught how to
Oh.
be witches. And, then we get into the whole healing woman, um, strain of all this, and that, a lot of times witches were, just the kind of the local healer. Uh, but at the same time, there was a kind of another idea of what a witch was, uh, where it's somebody who does weather magic, it's somebody who poisons people. So
Mm.
I think it can be a little confusing, for us looking backwards because we like things in nice, tidy categories, right?
Yes.
We want Oberon to be Oberon. We want a witch to be defined by a certain parameters, and that's just not how life works.
Mm.
People have different ideas. Words mean different things, and they get manipulated based on people's motivations and everything else. So, uh, I think yes, people were terrified of fairies. They were scared to have their children taken from them, and given a changeling instead. But on the other hand, it was safer to say, oh, I don't know what happened to my perfect child. No, I did not have sex with a demon. This was obviously a fairy
Mm.
swapped my perfectly wonderful baby out for this, whatever was wrong with it. And
Mm.
so fairies uh, become, almost kind of definitely a scapegoat. If the milk goes sour too soon, if the crops don't, grow the way they should,
If your beer goes flat,
your beer
yeah,
goes flat,
yeah, yeah.
right? All of those things you can blame on the fairies. Uh, Fairies were supposed to be able to make your cattle just drop dead out of nowhere, and there was something called fairy darts. And
Ah,
what these were actually were prehistoric arrowheads, which
ah,
people were finding. back then, and they thought that those were the tips of arrows shot by fairies. And so if somebody or uh, some creature died suddenly, people would look for the fairy darts,
Oh,
uh,
wow.
and assume that it was a fairy that had killed them. And again, this is better than blaming yourself, I guess, or
Yeah.
having the community blame you for demonic forces or something like that. So they create they become this sort of cushion between unexplainable events and human beings. But eventually that cushion starts to soak up, right, a lot of that bad associations. And so then, there's kind of some fear associated with
Mm.
that as well. And yes, people were often terrified. Now, James the Sixth, when asked about fairies, uh, he didn't think that they existed. He
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, he said he thought they made a pretty story, is essentially he said something like that. I'm sorry I don't have the quote. Um, but
He said that, well, in a Scottish accent anyway.
oh,
It's, oh, oh, Rick's put a pretty good story. I'm sure
well,
that was pinpoint accurate.
it was completely unconscious mimicry, and I can feel myself blushing already. But it's funny. Uh, yeah. In any event, you know, at the same time, we know that he really believed in witches. And
Yes.
so I find his distinction between the two pretty interesting, um, for the time
So
period.
if and this is pure conjecture, of course. Well, not pure conjecture. There is a scholarly basis for it. But when we're thinking of Macbeth,
Hmm.
that if the Weird Sisters were presented as fairies or nymphs,
Hmm.
as opposed to witches, would that be Shakespeare being a little bit careful potentially? What do you think?
I
Because a lot of people think that the witches. This is very much. Going along with James's fascination, but to hear that James didn't really believe in fairies, that puts a slightly different spin on it for me.
It's interesting, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think it's more that it gives them more power because witches are human.
Mm,
And it was, after all, the fates that
yes.
told you your destiny. And
Mm,
not so much witches. That wasn't
mm.
their shtick for the most part.
And it
They,
dibbles with that event that was put on for King James in Oxford in August 1605. Three sibyls greeting
hmm
James. So these prophetic figures. Yeah,
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. So, it could be a matter of terminology,
Mm,
just shifting. It's
yeah.
wholly possible because after Midsummer Night's Dream, that really did change the way
Yeah.
fairies were perceived. And it took off like crazy.
Yeah.
All of a sudden everybody was singing and dancing fairies and writing fairies and, um, you know, looking for all those French fairy tales and everything else, just kind of spun off from that like mad. So it is possible that by the time he wrote Macbeth, and certainly by the time Middleton was adapting it, that the meaning of fairy had shifted too much for it
Mm,
to be kind of a menacing figure at the beginning of a play like that. And the idea of what a witch was had expanded quite a
mm,
bit, thanks to
yeah,
James. And
yeah,
so I can sort of see that that kind of scapegoat quality shifting off of fairies and onto witches. I think right
yes.
in that brief amount of time. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that's partly what's always fascinated me so much about this era and about Shakespeare, uh, because you see this massive shift. And it's not just from fairies to witches, it's also from the gods to
Mm,
planets. It's from, Aristotle to Galileo. Um,
mm,
this sort of sharpening view of what is supernatural and what is just kind of, mortal level
mm.
um, experience. And wow, what a time period. I think Hecate, fascinating.
Oh,
Always been
yeah.
one of my favorites. Always been one of my favorites. Uh,
Yes.
she, she originates as, a very chthonic deity. Well, she originates as just kind of your typical goddess, um, helping with grow the crops, protect the family, protect mothers, protect infants, that kind of a thing. And then gradually shifts into this chthonic deity and also the underground. So she becomes, symbolic of like riches, the things under the earth that people would dig for, precious metals and gems and all that kind of thing. She gets associated very early on with dogs, and also she typically carries a key and a torch and a rope. So, um, she's who you want when you're trying to escape a dungeon. I
I
don't
thought
know,
she was often associated with daggers as well. Is that right?
and a dagger. She could hold a dagger.
Yes.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
When you have that moment in Macbeth where he's saying, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" and he
Mm,
speaks of Hecate there. He speaks of pale Hecate's offerings.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And a mirror, she often held a mirror. Um, she was sometimes, shown with three faces, one looking into the past, the present, and the future,
Uh,
real standard triple goddess stuff. And always associated with the moon,
yes, yeah.
forever. And came to represent the sort of crone part of the maiden mother crone trinity with Persephone or Artemis as the maiden and Demeter as the mother, and then Hecate as the crone. So that those whole layers, again go incredibly deep and incredibly far into the past. And
Mm,
it fascinates me that, here we've got this strain of fairy, right, come up through the fates, through Celtic ideas of the way the land works and the way nature works, German ideas of what happens under the ground, again the soup I was talking about, and it's kind of crystallized to a point where it's very kind of uniquely British at
mm,
that point, that particular combination of cultural mixture, uh, because Britain is such a melting pot. Everybody's come to conquer it at one point or another. You know,
mm,
the Scandinavians, the Germans, the,
mm.
the French Scandinavians, everybody at one point or another has come through. The Romans, of course. Um, and so there's this really wonderful particular flavor of mixture of fairy that happens in England at that time. And then all of a sudden, to my mind, here comes Hecate just crashing through, just
Yes,
straight from ancient Greece, just lands at a skidding halt right on the stage, in front of these fairies who had to go through every kind of possible cultural permutation to get to where they are. And Hecate just
yes.
shows up just exactly the same. as she started. And
Yes.
wow, that fascinates me. So, one of the things that Hecate is supposed to do is to say whether or not somebody is fit to rule. Like, in a sense,
Mm,
she kind of has the final say because she's such a, excuse me, she's such an ancient goddess that she just sort of had the seniority. It's like Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. Like, you have a fire goddess. If she puts her foot down, everybody's got to listen at some point. So
mm.
anyway, Hecate comes through and says, "Hey, you you witch fairy people, whatever we're calling them, you did not have the authority to tell this guy he was king.
Yeah.
That's my job, and you have usurped my job, and I'm salty about it. And now
Mm,
you gotta go fix this shit. Never mind. I'll fix it. I am clearly have to be the one to fix it. You're all worthless. And then she goes off in a huff. And, before we know it, uh, Macbeth is finished, destroyed, not only
mm,
by the anointed king, by the um, by the right of the Christian God, right? I mean, we get that message very clearly in Macbeth, but also by Hecate and by the land itself that rises up against him. So,
mm.
yeah, I think Macbeth is a really fascinating intersection of
Yeah.
all that.
And I just find it so remarkable that that link between witches and fairies and almost the protean nature, almost the interchangeability. Because yes, you've got Hecate with the witches,
Hmm.
possibly Middleton's interpolations, but would also work if they were presented as fairies or nymphs. And as I
Hmm.
alluded to earlier, you have Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So about a decade before Shakespeare writes Macbeth, say that we fairies that do run by the triple Hecate's team. So
Hmm.
it's just remarkable. It's been really eye-opening for me, I think, learning a little bit more about fairy law.
Well, I think what's so interesting, again, is how sort of crystallized at, from that point, we can see the fairies and the witches just diverge,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
to the point where, I mean, Wizard of Oz, right?
Oh, of
Perfect
course.
example,
Yeah.
right? We've got Glenda the
Green
Good,
witches.
typical fairy garb, and
Yeah.
then, the Wicked Witch of the West and, all
Green pointy
her
chin and
hag aesthetic, um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Looks like me with a hangover, I think. Yeah, yeah.
well, I think it looks more like me, but that's fine. I'm proud. It's an aesthetic I have worked to achieve and have achieved, so it's fine. Hair and all. Um,
Should we move on to answering the question then?
yeah, I think
Um,
we can answer the question. Yeah.
so I think viewers and listeners will have a pretty good sense of our answer to this. Did Shakespeare audiences believe in fairies? Uh, I would say, by and large, yes, and they might very well be scared of fairies in ways that we aren't today. My sense with a lot of fairy lore is that these are rural beings, and I get the sense that belief in fairies died away a little bit with the urbanization of England. And I find it really interesting with Mab, uh, who we haven't
Mm,
spoken much about, but
yeah.
Queen Mab takes advantage of advances in technology where she's riding a carriage.
Mm-hmm.
So Shakespeare being quite innovative and also describing her as being very, very tiny, as he is wont to do with his description of fairies, of course. I think actually that probably enhanced some of the comedy of A Midsummer Night's Dream, when you've got these descriptions of the fairy attendants that they
Mhm.
can creep into acorn cups and so on. And of course, Shakespeare's company were not able to find actors that small. They would have been played by children. So there's something of a disparity between
Even though
how
everybody
they're
was shorter
described,
back then, they weren't that short.
even but there is this curious disparity between how they're described on the page and
Hmm.
what must have been the reality on the stage. And that accounts in part for maybe why uh, there's a change with Macbeth. This is one of the theories with
Mm.
Macbeth, is that the weird sisters are changed from fairies into bearded hags, because if they were fairies or nymphs, they almost certainly would have been played by child actors,
Hmm.
and the king's men had less child actors at their disposal. So if you have three blokes with beards playing the weird sisters, then there's
So much
theatrical
easier to
exigencies
cast.
involved. Well, it's much easier to cast. It offers more doubling opportunities. So
Hmm.
there's a potential practical side to the adaptation, or hypothesized adaptation of Macbeth.
Hmm. Well, I'm I'm going to disagree with you for the first time, Darren. I I don't think that, well, let's put it this way. I don't think everyone believed in fairies.
No,
Um,
no, no. I don't think everyone believed it. Well, we know King James didn't, as we said earlier.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
also, we have to remember that Reginald Scott had written his discovery of witchcraft, and
Yes.
in there he really just kind of says, no, there's no such thing. They don't exist. Don't be
Mm,
silly, blah, 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 blah. And, it was a popular book. I mean, a lot of people agreed with him. So
mm,
I think what we can say is that definitely some people believed in fairies. I think when we're talking about Falstaff, he would have come from a time when everyone believed in fairies. And
yeah.
I think Shakespeare knew that. I think they were very self-conscious of seeing themselves as more uh, more educated. I would say enlightened, but that brings in a whole other connotation that I don't mean. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, you know, just more people of kind of a rational world. This whole shift towards rationalism that we were talking about earlier. Uh,
Mm,
so yeah, of course, Falstaff believed in fairies, but
mm,
uh, I'm trying to think of one of the more modern characters, but um, Love's Labor's Lost, right? They have a much more kind of rational view of
mm.
all these things. So yeah,
And you see,
fascinating
and you
stuff.
see them, you see them used for satirical purposes. When I mentioned The Alchemist
Mm-hmm.
by Johnson earlier,
Mm-hmm.
it's the absurdity of this character being duped into believing that he
Yeah.
is the nephew of the fairy queen, and it reminds me of an episode of Upstart Crow, and I'm almost certainly misremembering this, but there's an exchange, and I think it might be between David Mitchell Shakespeare and the character of Christopher Marlowe. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm sure I'm misremembering, but Shakespeare is essentially asked, "Do you believe in fairies?" And he says, "Well, the jury's out for me. I'm not sure." And he says something along the lines of, how else do we account for the dew on the grass in the morning if it be not fairy tears? It's something along those lines. It's just a hilarious exchange. But I think it binds that ambiguity in terms of beliefs during
Mm-hmm.
the period in a nutshell, really. I was trying to hedge my bets by using the phrase by and large. But we'd be interested to see what viewers and listeners think. Yeah. There would have been people believing in fairies, but of course there were people who didn't believe in a lot of supernatural forces.
Mm-hmm.
And
Just like there
the
were people.
Reginald Scott example is is
Yeah.
is really pertinent. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think again we can. this was to some extent regional, right? There were probably more
Yes.
people who
Yeah.
believed in fairies in the country and
Yes. Yeah.
less in the city because again, going back to the fairies' kind of original role as intermediaries between the natural world and
Yes.
you know the human world of cities and everything. And so it's kind of not surprising that as people become more and more citified and interact less and less with nature, that
Yes.
they're going to wonder where the dew on the grass comes from.
Yes.
If there's no
Yes.
grass to be seen, and there wasn't much in London at that
Yes.
point,
Yes.
there was a whole lot of mud.
There
Um,
was tis fairy droppings, surely.
so you can see how less of an awe of nature would make for less romanticizing
Yeah.
about it. I do
Yeah.
think it's interesting that fairies are famously uh, don't like iron, and
Mm.
so much of cities even now are built with iron.
I
And
didn't know
then
that. Fairies don't like iron.
oh, they do not like iron. It burns them.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
Oh, I'll keep that in mind. Yes. No, no, I didn't know that at all. No, I didn't
Oh
know that.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
very
Interesting.
it's like silver and werewolves, iron and fairies.
Wow.
And even I don't remember where I read it or where I got this idea, whether it was my own fevered brain or something that I read somewhere, but basically it was the idea that when the railroads went across the country and bound the land in iron,
Oh,
that that reduced the habitat for the fairies, and so they
wow.
shrunk farther and farther away from human civilization. And so yeah, we live in cities that are basically made of iron,
Yes. Yeah.
and we drive around in vehicles made with iron. And so
Yes.
even if there are fairies, we're not going to see them. you
No.
know you really have to get far out there to be someplace where there's no iron to repel a fairy.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know that at all. Wow.
I do have
Okay.
a I want to say that I have a slight gripe with the way Macbeth is often produced, which is that the first scene they make so creepy and terrifying that
Hmm.
it's really hard to build
Ah, yes. Yeah, yeah.
from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I I've always preferred a production where that first scene is kind of low key. Like, you know, these people, the witches are telling Macbeth something he wants to hear.
Mm.
And I think that part of his willingness, to break every law and custom is because he believes them. He thinks that they want him to succeed.
Mm.
And I
Yes.
I don't know how you get to that if they have bloody eyeballs dripping out and you
Yes,
know
yeah, yeah.
they're
Well, they're
these
described
horrible
as
terrifying
looking,
figures,
yes,
you
looking
know.
not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yes, they've got beards. But Banquo and Macbeth are not terrified by them. In some respect,
Dude,
they're
it,
seductive beings, aren't they?
if I never used tweezers, I too would have a beard. It's not
Uh, yeah.
it's not that unusual for older women to have chin hair. And
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not convinced that they had full on beards. I think that that was more a way of saying, "Hey, these were some old ladies," you know.
Ah, interesting. Yes.
So,
Yes. For
but
me, it feeds into the idea of androgyny that we see in the play. That
oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's fair.
Yes, in
Yeah,
a
I can
tragic
see that.
context, it speaks to
Mm-hmm.
civil
Mm-hmm.
chaos, and you see it with Lady Macbeth and sex me here, get rid of
Oh,
any
good
sense of
point.
femininity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's well, maybe that's for another episode. But
Yeah, we
I
have
can
to be
see a
careful.
title
We have
concerning
to be
beard.
careful. We're winding this topic down, right, Darren? Yeah. As I go off railing about Macbeth productions. All right. Anyway, yes, I think many people did believe in fairies, and many people did not.
Many people
And
did not.
it was a pivot point in terms
Yes,
of what fairies were and how they were used by the culture to deal with assorted anxieties.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So how is your do we usually do the book corner first, or do we do
We
recommended
do
reading
Writer's
first?
Corner first.
Readers corner, writers corner, of
Writer's
course.
Corner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm interested. Yes. So how is your book on the
Oh,
history of silver going?
I am having so much fun with this
Oh, that's good
history
to
of
hear.
silver. I'm just um you know, you have to become obsessed with your topic or you can't keep
Oh
going with it.
yeah.
But at this point I'm at the Silk Road and oh my goodness, you think you know about something until you go to write about it. I think I've
Yes, of
mentioned that
course.
before.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
what I am finding, and a lot of this is thanks to, research in the last 20 years, is that
Mm.
it was an incredibly diverse uh, network, to the point where you had, you know, Jewish people in China and, Scandinavian Buddhists and, everything in between. Just a fascinating era, a really rich period of time. I'm looking at, around kind of the medieval era, like around 800 CE. Uh, super, super fascinating. So I'm probably going to be stuck in the Silk Road for a while, but I,
Mm.
could not be happier to be
Mm.
there. I'm just loving every minute of it. Um,
And I don't want to send you completely off course, Rachel, but
yeah,
I'm interested because you were talking about fairies being scared of iron earlier.
yes.
Why are werewolves? Why is silver their kryptonite?
Uh, just silver is protective and
Okay.
it does have some antibiotic properties. Um,
Yeah.
and it's, very reflective, very shiny surface. And, it has an affinity with the moon. So you would almost think that werewolves would like it, uh,
Yes.
you know, but no, it turns out to kind of repel them as it's, the good lunar qualities, um,
Ah.
the true lunar qualities kind of scaring off the sort of corrupted
Oh
lunar
wow.
qualities. Uh, but it's pretty murky. Like I was looking into it for something solid that I could hang on to and put in my book. But werewolves go back to ancient Greece. There was one particular king who, um, I don't know, served somebody his own son for dinner, and
Mm,
in order to be punished, he was, turned into a wolf, and that's where all the lycanthropy comes from and everything
yeah.
else. But I could not find anything in there that said, "Oh, and he was, scared of silver or something." I don't know. It's not that tidy. It's not that tidy. And I think just
Ah.
because it is such an ancient
Wow.
thing. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. Oh, really interesting.
So I've got the silver book going, but of course I'm never happy only writing one book at a time. And
Yes.
so I've started working on the occult Shakespeare book. And I have a question for you, which
Oh,
is,
goodness.
can you tell me about uh, Thomas Kyd's fool in the Spanish tragedy and how he acts as a psychopomp. How
Thomas
does,
Kyd's fool in the Spanish
is
tragedy.
there a fool in the Spanish tragedy that,
Ooh.
um,
Um, not no, not really. There is a page boy who serves a similar purpose in some respects.
is there
So
something that you would think of as a clown? As,
yes, so there's one moment
okay.
that stands out for me, and it's you have the villain Lorenzo.
Mhm,
He's commissioned these goons to get rid of Horatio, and he wants his sister to marry his friend Balthazar, and then he essentially gets Pedringano, one of the goons, to get rid of another goon named Cerberine, and Lorenzo orchestrates it that Pedringano is caught by the Watch. And he says to Pedringano, "It's okay. I will ensure that a page arrives, a page boy, with a box, and you will receive your pardon." And there's a fabulous moment. Thomas Kyd is so wrongly been dismissed as this bombastic writer, but there's a fabulous moment where the page boy speaks to the audience. It's a moment laced with bitter dramatic irony, and he delivers this prose speech where he says he has to turn up as Pedringano is about to be executed with this box that is supposed to contain the pardon. And the page boy can't help but have a little peek into the box. So he's alone on stage. This is a
mhm,
soliloquy, essentially. And he pops the box open and realizes that it's empty, that Lorenzo has tricked Pedringano,
mhm,
and he prepares the audience. He says that this Pedringano is going to be so sure of his pardon that he will mock the executioner on the scaffold. He will jest himself to death. So it's a moment of comic brilliance, I think, that does have several parallels with some of the clownish figures that we were
mhm.
speaking about in a previous episode.
Well, and it sounds like he breaks the fourth wall, which is kind of another common
Yeah,
attribute of
yeah,
a fool or a clown. Uh,
yeah. It's not so much direct address. He's not saying you to the audience,
Okay.
but it does very much feel like he's occupying that liminal space between the
Mm-hmm.
stage
Mm-hmm.
characters and the audience, and it does feel like a breaking of the fourth wall in many respects. Yeah, yeah.
That's fascinating because I'm looking for plays where there's a fool or a clown who acts as a psychopomp, who, you know, mediates in that liminal space.
I would also recommend checking out Solomon and Posada,
Okay.
which is Kyd's full-length treatment of the play within a play in the Spanish tragedy. And you've got a couple of
Oh.
fascinating comic figures there. Uh, uh, Basilisco, who is a Mille Gloriosa, so this boasting figure, and Piston, who is a young boy that frequently
Mm.
undermines him. So I would recommend checking
All right.
out that play as well
I
because
sure
they
will.
serve fascinating purposes.
All right, and you have been very busy. So I want you to go through all the things you're working on now and all the things that have come out in the last, what, year? I
Oh
mean, you've got,
goodness! Oh,
get us
what has come
caught
out in
up.
the last year? I'll have to catch up myself, I think. In no particular order. Well, I've got the paperback of Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers has come out this month, March, which is
It's
lovely.
very exciting. So, and
Yeah, very exciting.
just for those of you who aren't writers, there is no guarantee that you're going to get a paperback of your book.
Oh
Um,
no, no.
The only reason that Darren got a paperback is because the hardback did so well. So
Oh, it
congratulations.
was.
That's
Oh,
wonderful.
thank you very much. Yeah, it's lovely, and I think Manchester, the publisher, have done a wonderful job, and it's really lovely in the first couple of pages that you've got quotations from reviews of the book, and I'm so pleased that it's gone down well. And I think the cover in vivid red is
It's
very
beautiful.
attractive.
Yeah, it's
I
gorgeous.
feel I've been doing more speaking than
Ah,
writing over the last year. So I've been all over the UK giving talks, really. A couple of weeks ago, on the Monday, I drove from Cardiff to Stratford upon Avon, where I gave a talk on Dr. Faustus to some A level students, so teenagers. And then I drove to Oxford to give a talk at Balliol College on Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers. And then I drove to London so that the next day I could give a talk to a school in London with Rob Easterway, who has a lovely book titled Much Ado About Numbers, about Shakespeare and
mm,
maths. We gave a talk called Shakespeare by Numbers to a school in London and then to the London Interdisciplinary School in the late afternoon. So I felt that I had topped Shakespeare's literary commutes going from Cardiff to Stratford to Oxford
no
to London.
kidding.
And then I had to go back
Wow.
to Weston-super-Mare actually when I was teaching the next day. So that's been
Oh
lovely. And
no.
just
Wow.
a couple of days ago, I gave my first public talk on the topic of Shakespeare and Panto. So that was for the Stratford School's Shakespeare Birthday Lecture, which is an annual event. So there were multiple schools from the Stratford and Warwickshire area, and it was just fascinating the kind of cocked eyebrows you get when people sit down
Mm,
and see the title Shakespeare and Panto, and uh, lovely member of the panel, brilliant scholar Vivian Thomas, fellow Welshman. He's he's sort of pointing at the screen, and he said to me, "Oh, what's this about then?" And I said, "Oh, you'll have to wait and see, Viv." And he said, "Oh, you speakers." And I said, "Well, it's a kind of book project." I said, it's a book project looking at Shakespeare through the lens of pantomime traditions and pantomime conventions." He just sort of looked at me and said, "Oh, good luck with that." But it was so interesting as a talk because I thought, yes, this is really worthwhile. That I think it gives people the sense of Shakespeare in the landscape of popular entertainment,
hmm
both in his own time
hmm
and our own. And I was speaking on multiple plays, so a very useful connecting thread for students, I think, is enhancing their knowledge of theatrical context, and that was very much the threads that I weave through those plays. And I was looking at these various aspects of pantomime from participatory techniques and comparing that to early modern performances, and then looking at the supernatural, the ghost
hmm
gag, he's behind you, the popularity of ghosts on the stage during Shakespeare's time, thinking about monsters, thinking about magic, and I think that the fundamental point of the talk that I concluded with was that I had tried to bottle some of the magic of theatre by comparing Shakespeare and pantomime, and that historically pantomimes try to guide audiences through
hmm
participatory techniques. But what I wanted the audience and what I would like readers to get a sense of is how Shakespeare guided his audiences, as well as his fellow actors, and the ways in which Shakespeare can guide us today as students of his work
hmm
over 400 years later. So the final line of my talk was on that point. All that's left for me to say is, he's behind you.
Well, that sounds super fun. And when you told me what the topic was, I thought that made perfect sense. That
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
that didn't surprise me at all. So it's interesting, isn't it, to because we're so immersed in it. We know that Shakespeare, was bawdy and, you know, wrote
yes,
dick joke after fart joke after dick joke, but
Yeah.
still out in the world, he's looked at as, you know, some kind of highfalutin,
Yes. There's
you know.
last night I was incorporating. So I did several interviews with people who had experience in both Shakespeare and pantomime, and I interviewed Miles Gregory, and I was incorporating those interviews, which were incredibly useful, into the book. And Miles Gregory, who was artistic director of the Pop-Up Globe in
Mm,
New Zealand, he said that the biggest barrier to Shakespeare today is elitism,
yes.
and those cultural hierarchies persist, I think. And I want to chip away at that. When you think of someone like David Garrick, who was incredibly important for Shakespeare's global legacy, but he recognized the popularity of Panto. He said, "If you won't come and see my Hamlet or my Lear, I shall give you Harlequin." And so he said, "I will perform pantomimes at my theatre in Drury Lane, but only during the Christmas season." So it's thanks to Garrick that certainly in the United Kingdom, pantomime is this
Ah,
festive Christmas tradition.
oh, that's
Uh,
interesting.
so they go hand in hand with David Garrick's
Definitely.
contributions to the
Mhm.
theatrical scene and the legacy of both of these forms. And I was writing just the other night on the filthy side of Shakespeare, actually, on the bawdiness and also on doggerel verse and deliberately bad puns, what I like to call Shakespeare's bad dad jokes. I think Romeo has got quite a few howlers, puns involving souls. As heavy as lead, whereas Mercutio has dancing shoes, and this terrible pun about flies, where he says that I must fly because he's been banished, but flies can still enjoy Juliet's beauty. So it's that, I guess, the willful corniness that
Mhm.
Shakespeare often embraces in comparison to Panto. And I guess my question for you, Rachel, would be: do you have a favourite moment of corniness or bawdiness with Shakespeare?
Oh gosh. Oh, that's a hard question, Darren.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I,
No,
there's
it's
there's a
okay. It's okay. There's just so dang many. I think I will say that I adore Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream, that
yeah.
I adore her sexual ambiguity,
Mm,
that we're really never quite sure
mm,
if she's had a romantic relationship with Hermia. And if she has, is this a joke because it's a boy playing a girl?
mm,
Is it a joke because it's two boys who were having a relationship with each other? Is
mm,
it a joke because, uh, John Lyly had intimated, I don't know, a decade or so earlier, maybe more, that Queen Elizabeth was a lesbian? I mean, how it just so many layers upon layers upon layers.
yes.
And
Yeah.
then, bottom, how can you just, uh, you know,
It's in the name, isn't it?
it's in the
I
name.
mean, it's quite childish humor, really, isn't it?
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. And you to the point where, and I think, see, this is I think an important point to make also, is that just because something is a sexual metaphor doesn't mean it was a joke. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, in a way that's a very 20th, 21st century gloss that we're putting on that, is that every
Mm,
time Shakespeare references sex that he's making a joke. No, that's just not
yeah.
true. When Juliet, says, "Oh, I'll, put this dagger in my rusty sheath," um,
Yeah.
she's not making a joke there. She's using
No.
a sexual metaphor.
Yeah.
On the other hand, bottom is obviously,
Yes.
one long joke. Um, I think though, one of my very favorite quotes out of Bottom, and the writer Ron Rosenbaum brings this up in his wonderful book Shakespeare's Wars, which I recommend to everybody. It's a fantastic book about Shakespeare scholarship. But in there, he talks about Bottom saying, um, that his dream has no bottom. And
Mm,
it's such a profound statement that, we've been
yes.
getting butt joke after fart joke after poop joke after dick joke after ball joke after blah, 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 blah. And then like he's coming out of this dream and he's having this existential crisis
Mm,
about who he is and what he is. So uh, yeah, I guess that's my
I love
favorite.
that. I love that. I love that human touch with a comic character, and it reminds me of Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Twelfth Night. I was adored
Oh,
once too. Yeah,
yeah,
that's the profundity of Shakespeare
it
sometimes,
really
isn't it? That
is.
make you laugh and then bang, suddenly you're crying. Yes,
Hmm.
and not
Hmm.
necessarily with laughter. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Oh, fabulous. Okay,
All righty. Well,
so
do you have anything coming up that you want to tell people to come see
Good
you?
question. Yes, on April the 12th, I am giving a talk, and this is geared primarily towards people who are in the UK. I'm not
Right.
expecting people to fly over for this,
As
unless you're
fun as
flying.
that would be.
As fun as that would be, April the 12th at the 1620s House and Garden in Leicester. I'm giving a talk on the topic of Shakespeare and kingship. So have a look out for that, and if you're available, please come along. It's a topic I've spoken on several times, and it always gets an electric reception. So I always look forward to speaking on the topic of Shakespeare and kingship. And I also actually have an event which is streamed. It's a conversation with Susan Dwyer Amussen on the topic of Shakespeare and authorship and collaboration. So keep an eye out for that one as well, and that will be available on April the 17th. So you can book tickets for that, and then you'll have access to our discussion, which at the time of our speaking, Rachel, we've not actually had yet. So yes, it will be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. A couple of events coming up. Yes, I feel like I'm jumping from topic to topic at the moment, which
Well,
is
you're
well, I
all
wouldn't have it any other way, really.
well, it's pretty consistently Shakespeare related.
That's true.
I think you're staying in your lane. If you,
I don't know. There are other early modern dramatists as well. Other dramatists are available.
I
Um,
apologize. I apologize. You're staying in the lane of early modern
yes, yes.
playwrights, and,
But that's
and
the great thing about early modern history and early modern
uh
drama is there's so much scope to it, and there's so much diversity
there
in
is no
topics that you're
bottom.
speaking on. There is no bottom. Panto one moment, Shakespeare and
Mhm.
kingship another, and Shakespeare and authorship. Yes, there is no bottom. I like it. Yes, yes,
All righty. Shall we give our book recommendations?
absolutely. Yes. Shall I go first or yourself?
Well, I need to find my list here. So
Well, I'll tell you what. While you look for your list, I've got mine
awesome.
just in front of me. So these are some of the books that I've consulted while digging into the topic of fairies. Mary Erin Lamb. This is an article actually titled "Taken by the Fairies: Fairy Practices and the Production of Popular Culture in a Midsummer Night's Dream." And that was published in Shakespeare Quarterly in the year 2000. Diane Purkiss, At the Bottom of the Garden, A Dark History of Fairies, Hobgoblins, and Other Troublesome Things. That was a book published by New York University Press in the same year, in 2000. 2000 was something of a bumper year for fairy scholarship, it seems, actually.
Nice.
So Marjorie Swann published The Politics of Fairylore in Early Modern English Literature. And that was published in Renaissance Quarterly. And then you have the great Ronald Hutton, his article, The Making of the Early Modern British Fairy Tradition, published in the Historical Journal in 2014. Darren Aldridge's Fairies and the Devil in Early Modern England, published in the 17th Century Journal in 2016. And there's a brand new book, which sounds incredibly exciting. It's by Francis Young, and it's called Fairies, A History. So this has come out with John Wiley and Sons this very year. I think it's been about a week since
Wow,
this book was published. So
that's
Francis Young's
exciting.
Fairies, A History. Yeah, definitely exciting. With regards to the theories behind Middleton's adaptation of Macbeth and
Mm.
a potential transformation of fairies to witches. As a starting point, I would recommend Gary Taylor and Rory Loughlin's The Canon and Chronology of Shakespeare's Works. That's a chapter in the New Oxford Shakespeare Authorship Companion, published in 2017. And there's also a blog that I found really fascinating and really useful. And it's written by David Fuller for Between Worlds, Folklore and Fairy Tales. And the blog is titled The Fairies of a Midsummer Night's Dream. And that was published online in 2017.
Awesome. Okay, I found my list. Um, okay, and I'm going to recommend British Goblins by W. Sykes, written in 1879. Folklore of Shakespeare by Reverend T.F. Thistleton Dyer, 1883,
I
1800s.
thought my surname was a mouthful. That's impressive. That's
Isn't it?
impressive.
I love that. Thistleton sounds like a
This was
fairy name. Yeah.
it does. Yeah.
Um, and oh shoot. Oh, there it is. There's the one. Um, my favorite fairy book is The Elizabethan Fairies, The Fairies of Folklore and the Fairies of Shakespeare by Minor White Latham, written in 1919, Columbia University Press. And
Oh.
that is the one I would absolutely recommend. And you can find that online. For free now. You don't have to do what I did and find one of the last remaining copies on Earth, but I'm so happy I have it because I love it. I love it so much. It was their PhD, and
Oh
it's a
wow.
fantastic book. But I'm also going to recommend The Discovery of Witchcraft by Reginald T. Scott, and
Yeah.
you can read, translations. Lord Berners translated Huon of Bordeaux, and
Yes.
that's back in like 1466, and that is most likely where Shakespeare would have encountered it. So
Mm.
it's easy to read, not at all difficult. So yeah. Oh, what a
Mm.
fun topic.
It is. Yes, it's a really lovely topic, and it looks like we've reached the end of this episode, our sixth episode.
Our sixth episode.
Incredible.
Um,
It's flown by, hasn't it?
it really has. And each time we think, oh no, what are we going to talk about next? But we always find something.
Well, thanks and ever thanks to those of you watching and listening to Shakespeare and Friends. Until the next time, it's a warm farewell from Rachel and me.
Bye bye.